Hi everyone, this is David with Naroth Audio. I'm very excited today to be introducing our latest project called Bloom. Bloom is a new cinematic sound engine focused on sonic evolution and growth. With 500 sound sources encapsulated in 4 layers, you're going to be able to morph and combine them all to create unique pads in drone soundscapes and so much more. Bloom is also available for the free Contact player, which means that you don't require the full version of Contact in order to use it. So in this walkthrough today, we're going to be going over everything that Bloom has to offer and what you can do with it. So to kick off this walkthrough, I wanted to talk about the most vital and most important feature of Bloom, which is its blooming. So the first instance you're going to see of this feature is on the edit page. You'll see down right here, you have your volume bloom, your pan bloom, tune bloom, and width. So to turn that on, you can simply just click here. And what the bloom actually kind of does is it works like a range control. So you're basically setting the start of the volume and the end of the volume here. And what this mod does is basically you're setting where in the CC will the range actually react. So when I have it here, it's just gonna, react right away like this. Let me solo this guy. So now when I move this up, down, that's how it's kind of working. But if I set it to the middle here, nothing's going to happen until the CC kind of gets past that center point. Nothing. And then the range happens. Now below that you have a few different modes for how the blooming can work. So you have linear, which is basically just point A to point B, and then you have peak mode, which let me set this here. Peak mode kind of works like point A to point B, back to point A again. Go back down. And now with the range too, this is also reversible, so you can have it go whichever way you want. For example, we can have it start loud and then get quiet. And then the last of the modes is auto. So this kind of does the blooming for you. It's set up if you go to the blooms panel all the way to the right here. Down at the bottom, you're going to have your frequencies for the auto bloom. So it's a short frequency meant to be used as kind of like down here is where it's like a long, slow frequency to a little bit faster up at the top. But I love putting things down right about here and put it up a little. And as you can hear, so this feature is great for when you're creating different sounds and stuff to kind of have a lot more motion just kind of happening fluidly. You can turn on the auto bloom to achieve that. So now the other way you're going to see a lot of the blooming effects is if we go over to the effects tab, you're going to see this little icon here, which looks like kind of like a little gray seed. So clicking that turns on the blooming for a parameter, and you have the same controls. So you have your range stuff here, then you have your mod here, and then you have your mode up at the top here. So clicking through this allows you to cycle through the different types of modes. And then if you wanted to turn something off, you could either click that here, or in the blooms page, you can also turn things off and on and edit them via here, which we're going to go over this more in depth in another section. So taking a look at the GUI now, you're going to notice down at the bottom is where we have our 4 layer panels. So we're going to begin by going over a few of the base controls that you can use for each of these layers. So to start, we have our volume here, we have our panning, and then we have our tune. And the tune can go up 12 semitones and down 12 semitones. To fine adjust or fine tune this, you can also hold shift to increase it or decrease it by 10 cents. And control clicking any of these parameters is going to set them back to their default values. Now above that, we have our mute and our solo. And to the right here, this little settings icon is how you can copy settings from other layers to the selected one. So as you can see, you can copy just the sound source, the edit settings, which is this whole page here. all of the effects settings, arpeggiator settings, or everything. So this one right here will basically just duplicate the channel you select to this one. And below we have the name of the sound source that's currently loaded and an icon of the category that it falls into. So right now we have violin organ loaded into this first layer, and a few little buttons here. So this one will reverse the sample for that layer, and then this one will shuffle it. So clicking this is just going to give you a random sound source for that layer. And then to the right, we also have this little button here, which is if you want to quickly just clear out a layer and turn it off, you can click that. So that basically removes that sample. So this layer is going to be totally inactive, can't do much with it until you load in a new sound. So if you wanted to do that, you could either click in this area here to open up the sound selection window, or you could just simply click down at the bottom again on this icon to open up the same sound selection window. Alright, so now we're going to start taking a look at how you can load sounds into Bloom. So two different ways you can do that. You can either click on this overlay up at the top here where it says layer inactive, or down at the bottom where it says no sound and empty. You can click on this icon here, and both of those ways are going to bring up the sound selection window. So on the left here, you can see all the different categories of types of sounds, such as guitars, brass, voice, winds, synths, wavetables, and this user folder we'll go into a little bit. And clicking on any of these is going to open up where you can see the instruments, and clicking further into here is where you can see all the actual sound sources themselves. So for example, this tongue drum has 3 different sound sources inside of it. So let's load that up. Got a little bit of release, which is good. Let's load up a few more. I love the water phone sounds. Those are some of my favorite. And a bunch of different synths. So this one's broken up into a bunch of different types of synths. So we have some basses, brass, some more classic sounds like this comes from the Juno 60. We have some synth design stuff that are custom sound design ones we made. Then a few different effects and guitars, a bunch of different synth keys. A few different synth strings, some things from tape. Then this unhealthy category is some more gnarly sounding stuff. Great for some horror sounds. A few different synth choirs, and so on. So some other ways that you can load in sounds too. We have these wavetables. So clicking on any of these is going to load up some of our custom wavetables. So you can see at the bottom, instead of there being an icon, it actually shows the waveform itself. So when you go into the Edit tab, you're also going to notice that the sample editing area is a little bit different. So instead of controlling the sample start, you can now control the position in the waveform itself, as well as the formant and the harmonics. So let me load up another one. So you can see that changing down at the bottom. And all of these are bloomable as well. So with the formant, we have a few different modes. So you have the linear, then you have sync, a few different bend plus and minuses, and so on. So you can select these and play around with that pretty easily. And now back to sound selection. Let's clear that out. So now you also have this user folder. So what the user folder is if you wanted to, you can load in your own user samples. So let's pull up some of those. And now what you can do is you can simply just drag and drop that into this area here. So now that's going to bring up the actual sample editing area. So if you wanted to, you could save this sample for easier recall, and that's going to appear in that user folder if you choose to save, which is not necessary. But if you did want to, you could give it a name here, and once you're done editing it, you can hit save. So a few other things with this, you are able to set the key for the sample so it's mapped across the keyboard correctly. So we know just from the sample name itself, this one is set to C1. And you can drag this up and down to change that. Now you also control the loop start and loop end of the sample. So let's select something right about there, and then probably give it a little bit more of a crossfade. And then you can also adjust the volume. So if the sample you're bringing in is very loud and hot, you can control the default sounds volume by bringing that down a bit. Now, like I said, you could choose to save if you want, so you could click that. But if you don't want to, it'll be recalled into this, or if you save this as a preset, this sample, as long as you don't move the original sample's location, they'll recall fine. So you can just click anywhere to get out of that. And if you ever wanted to go back in to re-edit it some more, down at the bottom below the reverse, you have this new icon for user sounds where you can click that to re-edit it. That's actually a really nice sound. I like that one a lot. So now let's try loading in another one. So this is also C1. Start the loop probably, actually a little bit like back here. Probably be a little bit longer. Now the third way you can load in sound is you also have the option to drag in your own user wavetables. So to do that, you simply find a wavetable you like and you drag it right here. So with the wavetable, there is no need to set it up in any way. It's all mapped out perfectly fine. So let's solo that. And we can go here and start editing it. Alright, so now we're going to start talking about the main edit page of Bloom. So to access that, you can simply just click on this edit tab up at the top. And from the bottom here is where you can select which layer that you want to edit. So right now we're currently selected layer 1. So in the edit page, you have a bunch of different controls, starting with the envelope. So this is going to adjust the ADSR of that particular layer. You have a curve knob, you have your attack, decay, sustain, and release. And this envelope has two different modes. So you can have it, default just adjusting the amp, but you can also switch over to a pitch mode here. So clicking this tab, and to activate that, you can simply just click on the power button next to it. So now we have this. And if you want to adjust how much the pitch envelope is actually affecting, you can click here and select how many semitones. So default is set to 7. So now let's turn that off. To the right of that, we have our range control. So for each layer, you can set on the keyboard what keys you want to be triggered, or to trigger that sample. So you can drag the slider left and right to basically select where you want this layer to play on the keyboard. And as you can see down here, this is changing those colors. Now, if you want to open up the keyboard outside of C1 to C6, you can click on these two buttons to the side, and that's going to get those extra octaves. Now, below here we have the volume bloom, pan bloom, and tune bloom that we kind of went over earlier. But let's just kind of like reiterate. So to activate this, you can simply click here. You can adjust the start and end. You have the few different modes here as well. To turn off any of these blooming, you can simply just click that. And to the right, we have our sample edit. So in the sample editor, you have a few different controls, such as the sample start here. So dragging this anywhere is going to change where the sample initially plays back from. And then you also have a few voice controls, so you can set 1 to 8 voices, as well as detune up to half a semitone. Let's set that back down. And now we also inside of Bloom have a whole granular synthesis engine. So to open up that, you can simply click on this granular tab here to show that. And to turn it on, you have two ways. You can either click this inactive overlay, or you can click the power button right next to it. So let's turn that on and mess around with it. So to start, you have your length and your frequency are the main controls. The length controls the length of the grains themselves, and the frequency controls how often those grains are going to occur. So let me set this down a little bit. The envelope also will affect the actual envelope of the grains themselves too. But below that you have an attack for the actual sound and a release for it. So So with this, there's a few other controls with the granular engine. You have this button here, which I've turned on, which only plays back the grains. So if you wanted to play everything, just the grains themselves, you could activate that. Or if you want the original sample to play as normal, you can leave that off. So you're going to get the original sample and the grains playing at the same time. Now we have a couple buttons down here, so this is going to add an octave to the grains. And then this is going to add a lower octave to the grains. Now these two buttons up here at the top are the two different types of modes for these grains. So this one right here, which looks a little chaotic, this is the random ordered mode. So whatever keys you have held down, it's going to play one grain per key in a random way. So let me give you an example of that. And let me move this back. And then mode next to it, which is the ordered mode, is going to play a grain for each note all at the same time. So two different ways you can activate these. Now we have some other controls for the grains. You have your range and your width. So the range actually controls where in the sample from the sample playhead is the grain going to activate. So with the range set like that, you can see it doesn't go all the way out. But now if we open this up to the max, now the grains are playing the whole sample. And then width is basically just a stereo imaging of the grains themselves. So they're going to alternate in a random way left and right. So the wider you have that, the more further out they're going to be. So the last thing I wanted to talk about in the edit page is down below the sample editor here, you have the cycle and speed controls. So the cycle mode, turning this on, basically creates a kind of range that a new sample playhead is going to be cycling through. So what this means is every time you press a new note, it's going to be triggered wherever this is at. And so another way you can kind of control this is with the speed. So using this, you can kind of speed it up or slow it down, so it kind of moves very slowly throughout the sample. Now, one of the most useful ways I think this cycle feature can be utilized is with the granular feature turned on. So let's activate that here. Let's turn the just grains up. We're gonna have to pull this attack down a bit. And range is good like that. So now what you're gonna see happen is that the playhead that's cycling, all the grains are gonna be rotating and revolving around that. So what this does is it basically allows you to create some really long, unique, evolving textures. If you have the speed set slow, and then you have the granular engine kind of like running as it moves around this sample. So let's load up some other sounds to get some cool examples of how this can be used. Let's do... Some of the winds are really neat with this. Or even better, bends are always fun. And let me turn off these effects. This a little bit more release. All right, so the other part to the edit page, we've mostly been looking at the editing the layers inside of Bloom, but we also, all the way to the right, we have this global edit. So in this page, you can control a few different parameters. For example, you can change the pitch bend going up 12 and minus 12, basically and everything in between. So what this kind of sounds like. So that's how you use that. And then the Bloom CC control. So by default, Bloom is set to run on the mod wheel, which is CC1. But you're able, for your setup, to change this to any of the other 127 CC numbers. So you can basically just click and drag to go through all those. If you need to get a specific one, it's sometimes easier. I like to just hold shift, and then it makes the dragging a little bit more easier to narrow in on that number. And then here you have a play mode, so you can set it to poly, which it's by default set to, or you can have it on mono mode. Now over here you have your velocity sensitivity. So this basically just changes the percentage of how hard you hit these keys will react to the volume. So, you know, when it's set up to 100%, basically softly pressing is hardly going to do anything versus pressing hard. All right, so in this next section, we're going to start going over the effects that Bloom has to offer. So to go to the effects, you can simply click on this effects tab up at the top. And again, you can select which layer you want to change the effects for by clicking on these tabs here. So to start, 4 different layers in Bloom each have their own independent effects. So you have a few different distortion modules, and you can turn on each category by clicking on this here or simply clicking here. So with distortion, we have our regular distortion, we have a lo-fi distortion, a tape saturator, and then we have a vinyl. So the distortion here is just your typical distortion. So let's... filter on. And then this can be bloomed as well. Then we have our lo-fi. tape saturator. And then we have our vinyl. So the vinyl kind of mimics a vinyl player. So when you have this on, you have a few different options like your rate and the amount. So the amount kind of controls the kind of like warped sound. And the rate controls the frequency of that. And then you also have the option with the vinyl to turn it modern or a more vintage sound. Now moving on from there, we have a simple delay with selection for the rate, as well as mix and feedback, and a ping pong mode. Below that, we have our reverb. And beneath that, we have a couple of modulation. We have a chorus and a flanger here. So again, to turn these on, you can simply just click the power icon next to the module, and that'll turn it on. Below that, we have our motion. So this kind of works like an LFO. You have two different modes. You can work with sync, or you can do a free mode. So this just kind of works on frequencies. Let's turn the amount up. And then a few different shapes for this. So you have your basic sine, you have a square that can be a pulse as well, and then you have a triangle and a sawtooth. And you can also adjust the phase of this too. Alright, now below that we have a 3-band EQ, so you can mix each layer how you choose. And beneath that, you're going to have a filter. So with this filter, there's a bunch of different types. We have a few different low passes, a few different high passes, and then we also have a couple of band passes, a notch, talk, and a phaser. So you can click this to change that. So for these, we have your frequency control and your resonance control. The frequency control is bloomable. And then you also have an envelope as well. So you can turn the envelope to control the filter by clicking the power button right here. And now that is active. So let's play that. And you can turn that off here. So now you have your forward layer effects, but next to that you also have a global effects layer. So let's kind of go over a few of these. So this distortion controls the distortion for basically all of the forward layers. So this one's a little bit more aggressive, so I'm going to turn that off to give you an example. Now below that you have another simple little delay. Beneath that you have a convolution reverb. So this one comes with a bunch of different convolutions. So you have a few different spaces and then a bunch of unusual, more effecty convolution reverbs. So these are some of my favorite kinds of sounds. This dreamverb is really great. Let's play that. And you can also change the convolution simply by clicking the arrows left and right. So now within the convolution reverb, you have your mix control, your size, early response size, and your late response size. You have your pre-delay, and then a high pass and a low pass for the reverb sound. Beneath that, you have some more mod stuff. You have another chorus, but instead of the flanger like the layers, you have a phaser instead. Then beneath that, an extra mixing tool, you have a compressor. So this kind of helps when you have a bunch of, or 4 different sounds, you can kind of glue them together a little bit better. So you have your basic compressor tools such as threshold, ratio, attack, release, and output. Now within the global, you also have another 3-band EQ to mix things a little bit more. And then beneath that, a more simple, just pure high pass and low pass. So next, let's start taking a look at the sequencer. So to begin, I'm just going to initialize this. Now to open up the sequencer, you can simply click on the Arp tab up at the top, and that's going to pull up the sequencer. But we don't have a sound loaded in yet, so let's load one right now. Let's do one of these. All right, so back to there. So now to turn on the sequencer, there's 2 ways to do it. Like before, you can either click the inactive overlay, or you can click on the power button next to the layer up at the top. So now our sequencer is active. So a few different components to it. You have the main sequencer area here. So this is where you set the value of each of the steps. You can drag and click to edit and create your own rhythms here. And then below that, this is where you can set the actual tune for each step. So first, one thing I wanted to show you is the Arp preset browser. So we have some custom-made rhythms and sequencer presets to kind of load in to get things going for you easier. So let's load one in real quick. So now we have this. Let me move the sample start a little bit. And so like I mentioned before, you can easily edit the tune of each step. Let's do something like this. I love having delays whenever I use this. So a few different other parts to the sequencer. So you have your rate, which you can change the actual value of the steps. So right now I have it set to 16th notes, but you can use eighths or quarters, a few different triplet options as well. And then this is where you can set the step value for the sequencer. So you can go from 4 all the way up to 24. Set this back to 16th. And then there's a few different modes for the sequencer itself. So you have the all mode, which is basically playing all the notes that you have held on the keyboard together for each step. And I'll show you some of the others, but I'm going to level that out real quick. Next up, you have up. So this is basically going to play all the notes in sequence, going from the lowest note to the highest note. Below that, you have down, which is the opposite. Then you have up down, which is a combination of the two. Then you have down up, which is the reverse of that. And then as played, which I love using this one a lot because you can kind of create your own thing with it. And now next to that, you have your filter. So you can set different filters on top of the sequencer. So right now you have options for low pass, a high pass filter, band pass, notch, phaser, and then a vowel and a talk. So let's load one of those. And the talk is always fun too. And then to the left over here, we have our sequencer targets. So you have the option to set the sequencer to control the decay and the attack. So let me give you an example of that. So how the attack kind of works in the decay is it basically whatever this is set to is the range that it's going to work in. So this would be all the way up on the sequencer step, and then this would be all the way down on the sequencer step. And then the same thing happens with the decay as well. So let's try that out. Turn this back down. Let's give a better example of how that kind of sounds like this. And now below that, you have sample start. So this is basically going to offset the sample from here on based on what level the sequencer step is at. Alright, so one other way that I love using the sequencer is using the cycle mode with it on. So you can turn that on like before just by clicking on the cycle, and then you have the options for speed and retrigger. So let's turn the speed up a little bit for this, and yeah, let's turn the retrigger on. Let's try it with a random sound just so we can get some other examples. So lots of different things you can do with the sequencer to make some pretty interesting pulses, ARPs, and so on. So I wanted to play through a few of the preset arpeggiated stuff and sequence stuff, just to give you an example of, many of the different ways that you can use this. So let's load up some of my favorites. Let's go up. Let's load up another one. A lot of really weird ones you can do in this, and some more fun ones. And then I like this one a lot too. Alright, so in this next section, I kind of want to dive into some of these presets and show you what's going on under the hood so you can get a better example of how Bloom can really be used. So let's load up another favorite of mine. Alright, I love this one. Okay, so let's start off with the layers. So in this first layer here, we have this ambience called In the Trees. So this is kind of the sound of a jungle floor. Next to that, we have our clarinet flutters. Then we have our waterphone whales, which is a waterphone that's been sound designed. And last but not least, we have our bowed bells. So one way you can easily view everything that's happening inside of Bloom as far as the blooming goes is simply by clicking on the Blooms tab over here. So now this is going to open up. So in this one, there isn't a whole lot of different blooms occurring, but we have our engine one. The filter cutoff is basically starting when it's down, starting low, and then going all the way up. So opening up for engine one. So let's take a listen to how that's working. So that's down and opening up. And then for engine 2, we have the volume, so it's starting lower, getting louder, and the filter cutoff as well, or same as engine 1. So let's take a listen to that. So that's kind of what is creating this sound, is all of that happening, along with a bunch of different effects that we have inside of Bloom too. So let's play that back. So if you're ever working on a preset and you kind of want to see what's happening underneath the hood, going to this Blooms tab kind of lays everything out for you in all in one place, so you can easily edit or change things around. So in this page, you have the option to turn off control like this, as well as edit the actual parameter, the blooming parameter as well. So you can do that quickly and easily here. Now down at the bottom, kind of like we went over before, this is where the auto bloom's at, so you can change the frequency for any of those auto blooms for each layer or the global layer. Alright, so now let's pick another preset to kind of take a look at. Scroll down towards the bottom. This one's a fun one. Alright, so this is Dueling Dragons. So let's take a look at how this one is working. So this one only consists of two different sounds inside. So you have the electric guitar called Chernobyl, which is a sound design guitar. And then we have our electric guitar E-bowed. So let's take a listen to layer 1 first and see how that's sounding. All right, and take a look at what this one is exactly doing. So for this one, we have the layer, its distortion is being bloomed. We have our lo-fi frequency also being bloomed, as well as the reverb mix. So the lo-fi frequency and the reverb mix are both set to auto bloom. So those are just kind of like cycling in a long frequency, it looks like, to give it that kind of like constant evolution. And then last, we have our LFO amount. So when you're playing with the bloom down at the bottom, you don't hear it. So you bring that up. So now with this one in particular, we actually have kind of an interesting way of doing it. So we have the first layer, no LFO when it's at the bottom, and then increasing, and then the exact opposite for the second guitar. So let's take a listen to that one now. So down at the bottom, it's moving, and then it's gone. So it's kind of going back and forth between these two separate layers. Now in full. Alright, so next we're going to be talking about how you can load and save presets. So loading presets, pretty simple. Up at the top here you have your preset browser where it's going to display what preset you currently have loaded. Giving that a click is going to open up the preset window. So over here is where you can view all of your different presets. And loading a preset is as simple as just giving it a click. Now, a few different ways you can kind of navigate this preset window a little bit easier is with the tagging to the right over here. So you can basically refine the preset list by type, by what sound sources they're made from, or characteristics they have, as well as what they're great for. So up at the top with the type, you have simple and complex. You have your user stuff and favorites. So those are both empty right now. You have your sound sources, so you can narrow it down by does it have synths or strings, does it have guitars or bells and keys, as well as you can narrow it down by characteristics. So is it ambient or is it aggressive? Is it textural or airy or atonal? And then the bottom, which is my favorite, because it just makes things so much easier to find what you're looking for, is what is it great for? So they've all been tagged. Basically, is it good for a pad? Or is it good for a drone or a soundscape? So clicking on any of these, you can kind of narrow down to a more refined thing just to get what you're looking for much faster. And so if you wanted to clear that out, you simply just click that, and then everything is defaulted back to just the entire preset window. And so next to that, we have this here, which I'm just going to briefly cover. You can also load in expansions in the future when we roll out like free preset updates and so on. You can click that, and you're going to have the option to load that in here just by double clicking on your new expansion preset. So let's return from that. Now saving presets. So first, why don't we create a preset, and then I'll show you how to save it. So we've initialized that, and I say we just go with random sounds. Works. And let's give that a little bit of release, and I'm kind of feeling like making a pad right now. So I feel like what might be interesting, let's activate this. Let's put it something like that, and let's turn the auto blooming on, but very slow. So right now I have it set up where it's just panning by itself, just a little bit left and right. And I love with that kind of stuff to also add on delays with ping pong on. Let's do something slow. Yeah, let's turn quarter triplet. Turn the mix up a little bit. Now what I think might be interesting, this is going to be our base of the preset. But let's start it off with a low pass that's going to bloom. So we're going to open it up all the way, and let's start it about here. We go a little bit lower, something like right there. So that's me opening it up and closing it. And I'm also going to add a little bit of a volume bloom, so it's going to start a little bit softer. Not too soft. All right, now let's move on to sound 2. Yeah, that would be nice for a pad. Let's move over here, give it like the first one a little bit of attack. Actually, for this one, I think I'm going to use the granular for this one. Let's activate that. Let's do some shorter grains, random mode. And for this, I'm going to turn the cycle on. Let's do that a little bit faster. Give that some attack. Turn the just grains on as well. That a little bit of width too. Now let's add another sound to this and see where it goes. I like that one. Maybe not. That one might be a little weird for this pad. But there is a way around that. I could turn granular on and find a spot where that doesn't happen, because I do like the tone of this one. What might be interesting for this one is if we start with the reverb blooming from all the way up so it's fully wet, and then coming down to maybe right about here. Let's turn the size up a bit too and see how that sounds. So it's a kind of little subtle texture change. So let's keep going with this one. Maybe we have some distortion on this one. So let's start it without and then add just a little bit. Oh, I need to turn that on first. Some attack to this as well. Alright, and with all my presets, I love just adding a little bit of convolution reverb on top of it all. So let's do one of these interesting ones. Let's do a longer early response. Maybe bring this down a little bit too. A little bit of high pass. Alright, so now let's begin to save this preset. So to save something, you can click here and you have two different options. If it's a preset that you've just edited and you want to basically just overwrite it because you changed something and you want to just resave it, you can simply click on that, or you can click down at the bottom, Save as New. So clicking on that is going to open up this whole window, and from here you can give your preset a name. So let's think about this one. I'm gonna call it A Day at the Spa, because it's a pad and it sounds relaxing to me. And so now you can tag it. You don't have to, but the options here, I find it easier to tag it because it's going to show up in your refined search whenever you're looking in the future. So now when you go to click save here, you notice up at the top, it now says user a day at the spa. So when we go into our preset window, you can see your user preset now at the bottom of the preset list. So if you're ever looking to find it, you can simply click on user and all of your user presets will show up here. Now another way you can quickly recall some sounds that you like is by favoriting them. So to favorite a sound or a preset, basically you have two ways. So when you have one loaded up at the top here, this little star icon here, you can give that a click. So let me load up a preset, give that a click, and then now when we go to our favorites, you can easily recall them there. And you can unfavorite either by clicking there or clicking here. And you can also favorite a preset too by clicking on this as well. So let me unfavorite those. And that's how you favorite. So that pretty much wraps up our walkthrough today. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you've learned a lot about Bloom and enjoyed it. We've put our heart into this project and can't wait to keep expanding on it. And we also can't wait to hear what you all think of it and what you do with Bloom as well. So until next time, this is David with Naroth Audio.